here today with Rick Renault at the Colony Meadery in Tingsboro, Massachusetts. And we're here today because the Western Museum has a great event coming up on April 5th. It's called, and I want to get it right, 2 Truths, 1 Lie, and 3 Pours. And the pours are going to be mead, which is why we're here to talk to you, Rick, today. Rick, what can you tell us about mead, its origins, how far back in time it goes?
Sure. Mead dates back probably 10,000 years. It might be the oldest alcoholic beverage. Mead is honey, water, and yeast fermented into an alcoholic beverage, usually anywhere between 8 and 20%. And the origins are throughout the world. But mostly known for like the Viking area and the old Egyptian area. They see it in Egyptian tombs and they see it in the Viking folklore, and became a little more popular when we had Game of Thrones. It kind of brought it up to today's familiarity with it. Mead probably wasn't made early in the United States because honey was so scarce. So different cultures had different uses for the mead.
So the event at the museum is going to focus on the legend of Prince Henry Sinclair and the Westford Knight. And that legend is that in the late 1300s, 100 years before Columbus, some Scottish explorers, following the paths that the Vikings had taken earlier, island hopped their way across the North Atlantic, ended up in maritime Canada, came down the coastline to the Merrimack River, up the Merrimack, and ended up in Westford. And the legend is that while they were in Westford on Prospect Hill, where downtown Westford is, one of the knights died, and that they carved an effigy into the rock ledge to memorialize his death. And that's the Westford Knight legend, and that's what we'll be talking about at the event at the museum on April 5th. My question to you is it possible that these Scottish explorers in the late 1300s would have had or brought mead with them?
So very possible, and because the English and the Scottish had mead as a regular beverage, the Vikings themselves used it as for celebrations, and but there was probably interactions between the Vikings and the English and the Scottish.
Very much, yes.
So yeah, they would have traded for honey. They would have produced honey, and again, mostly for celebrations, so that could have been something that they brought with them to celebrate a historical finding of significance.
One of the things I read about with mead is that the word honeymoon it basically comes from the fact that newlyweds were given a month's worth of mead to celebrate. So honey for a moon, a full moon, and that was the origin. So like you said, there's a lot of ritualistic purposes for mead. Was it part of the religious ceremonies as well?
So if we're talking like Vikings, where there was definitely a ritualistic, because Odin was, their big god was connected to mead. Okay. And then as, again, going into the English and Scottish and Irish folklore, honeymoon, give that newlywed couple a month's worth of honey, and that would more or less give them a stronger marriage and bless them with children. Okay. And so that if they would consume that every day for a month, that would give them a stronger marriage.
And allow them to tolerate each other a little bit in the early days of the awkward. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the other things I read is that the Sinclair family, which is the group that led this expedition in the 1300s, a generation or two later, they built the famous Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, which was made famous in the Da Vinci Code. One of the fascinating things that they discovered at Rosslyn Chapel when they did renovations in the past decade or so is that the workmen, the stonemasons, had built a little niche, a little alcove in the roof line to allow bees to go in and create a hive. And apparently the honey from this hive would drip down through a hole and land on the altar of the chapel. And the belief was, during that time period, that bees were sacred, that they were messengers of God, and that it was thought to be lucky to have bees in your place of worship. Have you ever heard that before?
Totally believable, and the monks have a long history of producing mead. So that would be very believable. They had straw skeps that they would put in, maybe these alcoves. They would also have logs or small wooden structures that they would put bees in. So yeah, very, very believable. I'm sure they did something like that.
So if the group in the 1390s, Prince Henry Sinclair and his group, if they were drinking mead, would they have found the honey here or brought it with them?
They would not have found the honey here. They would have had to brought it with them. So as our settlers came in, the pilgrims and all the settlers from Europe came into the United States, they brought honeybees with them. So honeybees were not native to North America. And then we brought them in small amounts in the beginning of our history. But then as history went on, we increased the amount of bees, honeybees, because honeybees supply a large portion of our agriculture. By pollination, they are responsible for 2/3 of what we eat. And so as our population got higher, we would need honeybees to supply our food.
So back in the 1390s, Sinclair would he have brought actual mead with him, or just the honeys and then produce the mead here? What would have been the possibilities?
The possibilities are they could have brought honey with them, and they could have brought casks of mead that they could have used and drank. Okay. So they could have done both, and it was basically honey back in those days. It was depending on the landscape. So the better your landscape was to have a nectar source for honeybees, the more honey that you could make. So as you got into the warmer climates, there was more, like France and those areas, in the Baltic regions, right. There was more honey produced, and they would have traded it to the civilizations that did not have as much honey.
Understood. So either way, somehow we think perhaps Prince Henry Sinclair brought honey with him, and on April 5th we're going to drink 3 pours of honey in celebration of this event. 2 truths, 1 lie, 3 pours, and the pours are going to be mead, and we can't wait to try that. That's April 5th at the Westford Museum. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.